The first motor is Hobbywing, so this is the timing, and that was the timing because my goal was to set it at 5 amps, so that's the KV 3700 roughly. This is the R1, 34 degrees, and notice it's a little less KV, about 100 less, but still 5 amps, and this is the Trinity, 37, beautiful timing, and it's a lot less KVs at 5 amps, but it has the strongest rotor out of them all. I am going to show you a graph, but these first 3 times, this would be the Hobbywing, so it's all in the same order. This is the other one, and then still Hobbywing, so these were the faster regular times, and then come the R1. So these are the graphs, you can always just pause on each one. This one's still the R1, and the next one is R1 as well. Now, the last 3 that I have right here, I'm going to show some other ones at the very end, but this is the slot machine. Now, keep in mind the rotor is actually an 1146, so it has more Gauss. So keep that in mind as well. This is the more detailed data, so if you pause the graphs, then you can see the graphs. Now, this is the actual data. So the first run, second run, third run is down here. I'll show you in a bit. So this is the slot machine. Now, again, a note about the slot machine. It's the TEP1146. One nice thing about Trinity is you can buy the slot machine can, just the can, and then buy the rotor separate. So there's more tunability, which is why if you're an individual that really loves tuning, go with the slot machine for that reason. If you just want something that works out of the box, Hobbywing G4s I think are amazing motors. But slot machine definitely offers more tunability. Plus, if you already have an Xfactor, it's the same rotors. Just buy the can. They're, I don't know, $50, $60 as of the time of this video, somewhere around there. Swap the rotor out and then toss that Xfactor. But that being said, if we compare the time, so this is 0 to 40 meters, and I tried going 40 meters every single time. But this is 3.4. It's not the fastest. This one was 3.510, and notice 3.510 from the slot machine. So these two would be pretty good to compare. 56, 56. So they are very similar. They're almost the same. These two motors are very, very similar between the two, which they're set at 5 amps. So I'm not really that surprised. Although this one has much less KV because of the rotor that I selected. If I had gone with the stock rotor, I believe the stock one is in 1119, this one would have been faster. So the R1, I will say, that would be my last pick. The only reason why I would pick an R1 would be if I were doing a short technical carpet track. And the only reason why, so hear me out on this, is unfortunately, well, first note, unfortunately my cameraman decided she had other priorities, such as taking care of maybe a kid or two. No, I'm kidding. I'm hoping she watches this video and then I get in trouble for making that comment. I really want to get in trouble. So that aside, the thing is that this R1 was actually very, very punchy. So off the line, it really wanted to set down the power quick and hard. The thing is, it eventually runs out of juice. So, the Trinity slot machine, again, this is a different rotor. If you're buying just the spec one, you would get, I believe it's in 1119. That would be, it has more KV, so it would be just gear appropriately. And gearing, I'm going to talk about gearing later on. I'm probably not going to do a test with the stock rotor because I actually like this rotor. But you're going to see why. Now, the reason why I picked 5 amps is because I needed a standard. Motors are really complex because of timing. You can change the timing and the amp draw. And then it's just too many variables. That's the reason why. So, back to the R1. R1, I think, would actually be great for a small technical carpet track. For that reason, it's very, very punchy. So if you're taking a really sharp turn, you just need to punch out and accelerate. R1 was the one that demonstrated on the car. But unfortunately, like I said, because of my cameraman, I don't have the footage, but that's what I observed. Now, the Hobbywing. This is the smoothest motor by far. One of the things that you can see, so if we look at these pretty much reach their terminal speed right around, say, 2 seconds. They're pretty close. The Hobbywing, 2 seconds. Well, this is not the best one, but let's see, 2 seconds over here. See, it's still pulling. Why? Because it still has more kV to go. So the Hobbywing is probably one that I would use for on-road, just because there's less traction. It's not as punchy, but it's smooth. This thing is so smooth, and you get the higher top speed. Now, if we compare, let's just say 1 second, 33.5, 1 second here, 42, let's say 1 second over here, 31. I'm going to take the 30, this one in the middle, 33. 1 second, whoa, punchy. Woohoo, very nice. Oh, very nice again. So this is probably why I would pick this for those smaller tracks. Although this is just 13.5, 21.5. I actually love the Hobbywing. Hobbywing's the one that has given me the best results for that particular KV. But the slot machine is somewhere in the middle. Let's see. So if we look at some of the other times, so 55, 56, 56 with the times 3:45, that was the fastest, 3, 5:10, 3:5. I know I said times and I gave you speed. So these are very similar. So the R1, this is actually pretty consistent. The R1 I would say is the slowest. Slot machine is the next. This is at 5 amps. And the Hobbywing was simply the fastest, 3:45 every single time, 57, 57, 56. Now, one quick note, pause the table and look at similar times, 2.8, 56, 2.8, 57.5, 2.8, 55.5, oops, sorry, 56. So the Hobbywing is simply faster on the higher end. Lower end, notice the R1 is faster than this, and then it just dies off. So this is one of the reasons why it's smoother, because it just keeps going, versus this one reaches a high speed really fast and then just tapers off. High speed, really fast, tapers off. Notice 1 second compared to 1 second. 1 second versus, oh, well, actually here they kind of swapped roles. But usually the R1, you could see it just punch, accelerate, and then it would just die off, versus the Hobbywing just kept pulling. So that's something else to keep in mind. Let's see, what else do we have? So 1 second, 31, 1 second, 38, 1 second, 33. Now also keep in mind that the SkyRC GPS, that reads about every second when it comes to actual speed. That's the reason why I picked a second. You can pick 2 seconds. Those are generally going to be the most accurate. So 53, 54.5, and 58. So definitely Hobbywing for top speed. Really small low end, this one. This one is somewhere in between, but it's not fair to slot machine because remember, I'm using a totally different rotor than what spec rotors would be. Now, I did 2 more runs with the slot machine, and I'm going to give you the details in a bit, but these are the graphs if you want to pause. So let me go into the data table now. Runs with the slot machine. So all of these 3 runs that I'm about to show you are all with the slot machine. Now, this is a really nice run with the slot machine. It's the nicest. And so this is at 5 amp timing. Well, sorry, I said 5 amp timing. 5 amp draw. And the next one is at close to 7 amp draw. And nothing changed. Now, this is really not fair because I didn't do multiple runs like I generally do. So here, this is a 349, and to be honest, it was just 1 run. The car stayed straight, stayed on that 4 foot, 120 centimeter lane roughly. So I took the numbers. But the main thing is, if we can compare the speeds, we're looking at, this one starts off a little slower, but then it starts to speed up. So it kind of makes sense, increase the timing, maybe a little less torque possibly. Then again, it was one run, so I cannot come to any real logical conclusions. I would have to test it multiple times. Now, we could always go to one of the slower ones. For example, this 510, right? It's a lot faster compared to this 510. It's faster than this one as well. So that's something to keep in mind. But then what I decided to do is I swapped the pinion to a 24 tooth pinion. So that's a 14% increase in teeth, which gave me an 8% increase in speed. So here we go, 61 kilometers per hour. Just by swapping that out, first run, perfect. 3.3, that was staying within that 4-foot lane, which is about 120 centimeters, without really much input. So that is one of the things. Out of these three motors, the R1 was the most difficult on the drag car because I did have to give it some input and do a little more correction. Hobbywing, I don't really have to think about anything. The way it's set up with this gearing, I just pull on the throttle all the way and just watch it go. The Trinity might have a slight input, but to be honest, the Trinity is very easy to manage. Even, I mean, this is a lot faster than any of my times with the Hobbywing. Now, to be fair, I would have to play around with the Hobbywing, increase the timing, etc. But in general, as I mentioned before, the Hobbywing is probably the one I would pick for regular on-road tracks. That's probably what I would use, just because it's smooth. It's really, really smooth. And based on my experiences with higher turn motors, such as the 21.5, they're so reliable. R1, they're very, very punchy. So this one, maybe for a small technical carpet track, would be great because it's really, really punchy. You can see it. Slot machine, this is, for the money, this is the most tunable motor out there. Just buy the can and then buy the rotor. Buying the two things separate is not going to be much difference than buying a complete motor, but you can pick and choose what you want. Now, if you're running a spec class, you're kind of out of luck on that. The slot machine with the spec rotor, I believe it's the 1119, is going to be very similar to the Hobbywing. The Hobbywing is going to beat it, though, slightly on lighter vehicles. So on touring cars, for example. Once you start going on something else, maybe buggies, short course, you may want to consider. Actually, no, Hobbywing's still a nicer motor. But they're close. Well, this one's tunable, so you can pick and choose your rotor. So I guess go with this one. I would go with this one. R1, I don't know what to say about it. It's very low kV. Yeah, if you gear it up, you would have to play with the timing and then gearing for the R1. But without doing much testing, I can't really say anything about it, except for those are my thoughts. My thoughts are Hobbywing is probably going to be your best overall out of the box. Don't mess around with it. Just plug and play in a sense. R1 is going to be more of your high grip technical track just because it has such a punch. And then this one, the slot machine, it's the most tunable by far. I mean, I think it was such a great move that Trinity did, allowing customers to buy the rotors separately from the actual can. So if you want tunability and play around with rotors, this is the one I would go with. Yes, you can buy rotors for these other motors. The stock rotors aren't that great on the R1. So you can get better ones, but then at that point, you're closer to $200 versus this, you're around 100, 110, maybe 120 if you know what rotor you want and which can. Now, I do have tests of different rotors for Trinity, but this is on the Xfactor, not the slot machine. But do look at those videos. Even though it's not the slot machine, it'll give you an idea of what changing the rotor will do using the same can. And I have some of these on I want to say a 21.5 and a 13.5. I might even have them on the 17.5. So look out for those videos and then see what they do. So what happens when you use the same diameter but more Gauss, or what happens when you increase the diameter. So I have some of those videos, separate videos with the motors, so you can check those out as well. But that's one of the things that I do love about Trinity. So that being said, thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe if you have not, and I'll catch you on the next one.
Oh, my hair! My car! My rod!